Hello, all, and welcome to our webinar today on induction charging, also known as wireless charging for electric vehicles. Our webinar today is brought to you with the support of Momentum Dynamics. My name is Cynthia Yusuf. I am the Member Relations Manager here at Fourth. Before I pass it along to our moderator today, who is Whit Jamieson, he is our program associate here at Fourth. We have some introductions and some announcements. Attendees, we ask that you please submit all your questions through the attendee chat. You will find that at your left corner of your screen or on the top bar of your screen. We will get through your questions during the Q&A of the webinar. Introduction to Fourth for some of our newer attendees today. Fourth, we are a nonprofit trade association advocating for smart transportation through our work in four main focus areas, which are industry innovations, demonstration projects, policy advocacy, and consumer engagement. Through all of these efforts, we are hoping to advance equitable, clean transportation to all. If you would like to learn more about Fourth, you can reach us at fourthmobility.org. And again, our webinars and the work we do at Fourth cannot be done without the support of our members and our sponsors for these webinars. So we want to say thank you so much to you all for supporting our mission at Fourth. And if you don't know more about Fourth, our membership or sponsorship opportunity provides visibility during the webinar. You can reach out to me, myself, Cynthia Yusuf. My email is on the slide. I will also include my email in the recap email as well. We have some announcements regarding the virtual roadmap conference that will be taking place June 14th through the 16th, 2021. We're sad we won't be seeing all your faces in 2021, but we'll be seeing them in a virtual capacity. So we'll find new ways to have our networking opportunities doing that. The deadline for the Roadmap Awards is coming up on Friday, March 5th. So we have 5 different categories. If you want to learn more about that, you can visit www.roadmapfort.org, and we will share more information with you during the recap as well. And we also like to thank our sponsors for the Roadmap Mobility for All Scholarship. We are currently accepting applications for that. That application deadline is March 17th. And with that, we have Metro as well as the Bay Area Air Quality Management that are supporting access to the conference for folks working in equity and transportation electrification. Our early adopter tickets are still going on, so if you would like to register and save big, please do so now before the prices go up. And for more information about anything roadmap related, whether you're interested in sponsoring, supporting, you can reach out to our International Marketing Manager, Ashley Duplanty. Her email is also on the screen. And with that, I'll pass it along to our fabulous moderator today, Whit.
Hello, all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an excellent panel, starting with Michael McHale, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer from Momentum Dynamics. And he shared with us that his most impactful EV experience was recently testing the Rivian R1T out in the desert, and feeling that 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds is just absolutely thrilling. Next, we have Dr. Laurent Vroey, Head of Green Mobility at ENGIE, and he is joining us from Europe. So it's nighttime there. His most momentous EV experience is from having his child experience EVs at a really young age. He was one of the first people to have an EV or test drive an EV back 10, 15 years ago. And his kid is growing up always wanting to drive in the electric vehicle rather than their internal combustion engine vehicle. And last, we've got Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield, founder and lead presenter at Transport Evolved. And Nikki, her favorite, her momentous EV experience was getting married and driving away in her 1984 Volkswagen City Stromer EV. Yeah, I'd never heard of that one before. So very excited to hear of new EVs from long ago. Next, we have some polls for you. So the first question is, what industry sector are you representing? Very interesting. A lot of NGO, academia, and other category represented, but also with some city and utility folks in the mix, of course. Thank you all for taking that poll. We'll leave it up for a little longer. All right. All right. Thank you, Simbi. You can close it. Next poll up is, have you experienced wireless charging? I personally have not, so this webinar is very exciting for me. To answer your question, Dennis, yes, in an EV. I know many people have experienced wireless charging with their phones, as that has become more and more common. Looks like 80% of people have not. I presume out in the greater public, far more people have not experienced it. So we're lucky to have so many people that have. All right, we've got a few more polls coming up as well. What worries you about wireless charging, if anything? All right. Cost and efficiency very much makes sense. All right. It's a good addition from Boris in the comments. All right. How much would you be willing to pay for wireless charging to be added to your vehicle? If any at all. I see many people are going with that should be included with the price of the vehicle. Yeah. I think it depends on the situation. I think we'll definitely touch upon that topic a couple of times during this this panel. All right. And I think we may have one more. Yeah. What is the benefit of wireless charging, in your opinion? I've never seen a poll like this. Holy cow. Thank you to that person that put the cool factor.
I was going to say, Whit, I think we have a unanimous decision on this one.
Yeah. No, this is hands down convenience. Absolutely. And Simbi, do we have one last poll question?
That is all our poll questions.
All right. In that case, I'll hand it off to Michael McHale with Momentum Dynamic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. I'll just keep talking. So I guess my job is to change your minds a little bit on the poll. Thank you, Jameson. I guess my job is to change your mind a little bit on that poll, because wireless charging is not primarily about convenience, not right now. I think in the longer run that will be true, but right now it's about efficiency, and I can talk to that in a second. So I can see my slides here, but I can't see how to take them forward. I have a back button, but I don't see a forward button. No, I don't see anything. Okay, so if someone listening can just fast forward for me, and I'll just say next slide. Is that okay? All right, thanks. Go back one. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't say that. We could see it in rehearsals. So my name is Michael McHale. I'm with Momentum Dynamics. Let me tell you a little bit about us. We are a Pennsylvania-based company. We're 10 years in existence, and we produce high-power wireless charging systems for the automotive industry. The automotive industry means anything that moves with wheels, essentially. So that's anything from a small pod up to a big truck, Class 8 trucks and above. What you're seeing here is a simulation of our charging system outside of a railway station. What you're not seeing there is any charging cables, because it's wireless power, so there are no charging cables. What does that mean for that beautiful railway station? Well, it means that it stays beautiful, and the infrastructure stays hidden underground, which protects it and keeps it free from damage, free from wear and tear. And what it means for these taxi drivers in this picture, it allows them to charge while they're doing their work. So it's an efficiency system. Now, that same system applies to buses or taxis or last mile delivery vehicles, or anything really where the driver needs to earn their living by moving the vehicle. And of course, the driver could be the vehicle itself when we move to autonomous vehicles, because in an autonomous space, it's not really autonomous if the vehicle has to drive itself to a space where someone's waiting with a plug to plug the thing in. With wireless charging, the autonomous vehicle drives over the top of the pads, takes its charge, and moves on. So it's really about efficiency, not yet about convenience. Fast forward for me, please. So one of the ways I like to think about this is we're doing this because we're saving companies money. When you put wireless charging into a business such as a fleet business, such as a delivery business, then you're saving money for that company. But at the same time, we're also going to save where we live, because we can't have millions and millions of chargers. It cannot be. So we have to rethink how we do this thing. Next slide, please. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to look like this. We think the charging future looks really sexy when we see it in CGI, and when we see it in real life, it tends to look a bit more like this. And that's not optimum. I don't want to live in that street. I'm sure you don't want to live in that street, and our cities don't have to look like that if we think about it properly. Next slide, please. Same thing. Next slide, please. So we have this vision inside Momentum Dynamics. We call it Clean Streets. And we think that we can provide charging infrastructure to cities and to operating entities, because, of course, not everything that charges is a car. Many things that charge are a vehicle used by the city or used by a private company. We think we can provide that charging infrastructure without you seeing the infrastructure. We think that's a better way. Next slide, please. So how wireless works in very simple terms: there is a pad in the ground, there is a matching pad on the vehicle. There can be one pad or two pads or 4 or 6 or 8, depending on the size of the vehicle. One pad gets you 50 kilowatts, 2 pads get you 100, 4 pads get you 200 or up to 300, and so on. The vehicle drives over the pad that's buried in the ground. They talk to each other, they instantly start charging. And that's the point here, is that it doesn't require the driver to leave the vehicle to take an extra step that would slow them down in their day. The benefit of that is that the charging, being instantaneous, can happen very regularly without the driver being inconvenienced. I can see questions popping up, but I'll have to take them at the end because I don't stay there long. Next slide, please. That's really it. I need to work on this slide. I really don't like it, but it gives you the idea. There's the pad that goes onto the vehicle. There's a second pad that goes into the ground. It's wired in, and you get automatic charging as the two pads aligned. Next slide, please. Our range of capability goes from 25 kilowatts to 450, and then across all sectors too. But yes, it can be retrofitted to any vehicle that is electric. And so we can go from pretty much where cars are today all the way through to light rail, the red box in the middle, the green box is where we're going. Next slide, please. This is what the beauty of part for me, and I think it answers some of your questions. The same pads in the ground can charge all of those vehicles. So if you are a city operator and you want your EMS vehicles and your fleet vehicles and your mail vehicles and your trucks charging without visible cables efficiently, they can just charge on the same pads as each other. In standby mode, it doesn't work at all. It's off. Cold weather makes no difference. Next slide, please. Love the questions, by the way. I'll skip this because I said a bunch of them already. Next slide, please. 20% alignment. Here's a big question for all you guys. Like, if you're using electric vehicles in your fleets during the day and they come back to a depot empty at night, that's a huge drain on your system. Our system keeps the vehicles charged all day as you go around the loops. The drivers just do it. It just happens. It's pretty easy to do. Payment is through the system. It's data and power transfer. I'm getting good at answering these questions now. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I can't get to that question, sorry. So here's an example. This is a city. You might recognize the pattern, but it's just there to show you an example. Here are different bus routes, and where those routes connect is where we put our wireless charging systems. So that the blue route and the red route both get their charging on the way around. The buses never need to leave the route. So in electric buses at 150-mile range, a diesel bus is 600-mile range. You probably currently have to replace electric buses 2-to-1 with a diesel bus. They're $1 million each. We can put an electric bus onto your route and make it virtually range free. Like it has no range restriction at all. It's 100% 24 hours in service. Next question. Here's our case study in Oslo, Norway. We're doing this with Jaguar Land Rover, our partner over there. Their taxi drivers did not want to stop to charge. It takes them an hour to do it. They realized that's an hour a day. It's 7 hours a week. It's a full day of work lost. They didn't want to do that. We're putting our system in there where they pull up to the railway station, they pick up their passenger, they charge, and they move on. Next slide, please. I've been told 2 minutes left. So here's the solution. It's very easy. It's very quick. The drivers like it. They pull up to the passenger. They pick up the passenger. They pick up 3 minutes of charge while that's happening. They go on their loop, drop the passenger off, come back, get it again. Next slide, please. So here,
Looks like we're having some technical difficulties with Michael's. Yeah, he's reloading. So we might need to come back to him in a little bit. So next up we have Dr. Laurent Vroey. In case Michael doesn't get back on here, we of course can go back to some of these questions and have Michael finish once we get to the Q&A. But for now, let's have Dr. Laurent turn on his camera and take it from here. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, Whit. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Laurent Vroey, in charge of the electric mobility within ENGIE. ENGIE is an energy utility based in Paris, but present in many countries in the world. I'm heading the research on green mobility in particular. I will try to give you a kind of another view on what we see on our side and how we feel inductive charging in today and in the future. So just a few words on ENGIE. We are one of the most important independent power producers in the world. We are not just working on production, also on supply. In Europe, distribution and transport are separated from supply and production. So that's part of the rules in Europe. On EV in particular, we are also working on services, mobility services. We are deploying a charging point. We are operating charging points. Obviously today, mostly and only, I would say, conductive ones. But this is the purpose of today. We are not only considering what we have today, but also looking at what we could have in the future. So just an overview, very short overview about the European context. You might know that in Europe, Germany is one of the countries that is the most advanced and the most pushing in terms of standardization and protocols. In 2012, they were expecting inductive charging to be on the market by 2020, available, interoperable. And when we look today at the situation in Europe, things have evolved, of course. We were initially, a few years ago, more on retrofitted cars for specific small volumes with limited power. A lot of cars were testing that, or at least were a lot of car makers were giving one of their models to do some tests with it, but not with a real commercial view at that moment. Since then, there were evolutions, namely in the power that can be delivered. Michael told you about the 50 kilowatt. A few years ago, it was up to 20. And so we see that there is a clear evolution there. But if we look today at the real implementations, we are still in the pilot mode, and testing are running on technical maturity, interoperability that needs to be further demonstrated, and there are a lot of nice opportunities and cases that are focused on that. Just to give you an idea, a few years ago in Belgium, which is my country, we had inductive charging pilot in Bruges. You might know Bruges, which is one of we call it the Venice of the North in Europe. And they decided to implement electric buses with inductive charging. The solution that was implemented at that time is now out of order, and those buses are not driving for 3 years, which is of course not a good signal from this time. But we see that the new cases are much more promising. So things are really evolving in terms of evolution and solutions and robustness as well. Now, from a utility point of view, why would we choose inductive charging? Well, there are different reasons for that. One of the reasons as a utility company is to, of course, implement more electricity, deploy more electricity options. So every solution that is helping pushing EV is definitely interesting for us. And having some cases such as the one that Michael presented on taxi queuing, for example, but also e-buses, opportunity charging at the end of the line, for example, or logistics at B2B. All these kinds of fleets that require otherwise a lot of plug and unplug moments. This is a way to facilitate the transition to EV if the charging solution is more convenient. So that's one. Another one is about the specific problems that might appear. You see the picture in the second picture on the slide, where you have a cable that is basically going from the garage to the car and crossing over the sidewalk. Definitely, you can imagine the risks that might happen for people going on the cable, possibly falling. older, elderly people, diseased people having to roll on the cable. That's really not a good approach. It's also forbidden, by the way, in many countries. So for some specific cases, also at residential level, inductive charging can be interesting, and especially when there is no garage, let's say. And a third one, and this is one that we have heard at several times as well, is when you look at cities or places with a historical value where you don't specifically want to degrade it with, for example, a visible pantograph or any kind of other conductive solution. It makes sense having underground charging solution like the pads for inductive charging. Even if there is still, of course, the question of connecting the pad to the grid, and this is not always that easy to bring the cable from the grid access to the where you want to charge a vehicle. So there might be some work, some grounding work to be foreseen there. But the idea is indeed that, especially for public tenders from an energy utility company asking to deploy a certain infrastructure in a given place with the limited visibility, this might be an option. Other reasons are, I think the picture is talking for itself. Having time to spend under the rain to connect the cable where otherwise you could simply just park on the pad and go directly home without taking time to take the cable, put it down, possibly opening the place to connect it. That's definitely an additional comfort for the user. And finally, as was also mentioned, when we look at the future of mobility, and in particular the autonomous solutions, charging solution, but from an energy point of view, energy supply point of view, also discharging solutions might be of interest, and especially when we're talking about energy management services, where autonomous vehicles will be the next step to really make things much more flexible. Autonomous vehicles could decide going and charge at moments where the energy is at the lowest cost, or when the grid is congested, to benefit from the energy that is available and to limit the peaks. Discharging is also possible, but again, autonomous vehicles will also be better used if there is no need for any manual charging there, which is also, from a utility perspective, an interesting case. No, why not inductive charging? Because of course, otherwise we would have it everywhere today already. One of the reasons we identify is the way inductive charging is developing on its own. For example, we know that the development process and the commercial process is relatively slow. And why? Because actually, in most of the cases, the business model is based on the license to operate, meaning strongly related to patents, and also meaning that different actors might have parts of the solution, but not necessarily the full one, leading to a need to interact with different providers, and making it complicated to have it. So basically, we are, from our point of view, a bit of facing a kind of opposition between that license to operate approach and a standard approach on the material. For conductive charging, definitely a charger has much less technical considerations in terms of exclusivity, patent, and so on, which makes a difference today. Also, from a car point of view and a car O&M point of view, definitely, each dollar counts, meaning that if there is an additional price for the inductive solution that will come next to the conductive solution in the car. It's not the one or the other one. It's or conductive or both. This might lead to additional costs. And in the poll, it was very clear that we more or less, all of us, are considering that extra costs would be kind of an issue on that topic. Also, why no inductive charging today? Because when we look at the implementation of an infrastructure, and especially as an energy supplier that is delivering energy services, also in a concession mode with co-investment possibly, there is a need to choose the easiest and the most robust solution. And today, of course, we have said it. The maturity is not the same for conductive and for inductive. So today, this is still a solution that has to be de-risked at some point, and this is also why all the pilots are relevant there. And finally, it's also important from an energy supplier, an energy service provider, to make the end user's life the easiest. And we were talking about convenience in the poll. So today, conductive charging is everywhere. Every simple plug can be used to charge the car, which is today not the case for inductive solutions. Also meaning that this is why I say that for a car there is the need or only for conductive or for both, because you always need a way to charge at some point. And meaning that the inductive charging solution is coming on top of the conductive one. So to summarize, if we had the ideal world from an energy point of view, we would consider the charging infrastructure as a commodity. So whatever the technology, the most important for us is that the end user has access to the energy, and that as a utility possibly involved in the material deployment, in the investment in the material, that we can get the maximum value of it, also in terms of flexibility services, for example, and additional value that can come from it. So it should be totally hardware agnostic, whatever, if it is conductive or inductive. The most important is that it works. It is interoperable, and it can be used in all situations. So we are not focusing as energy suppliers in one single technology. We are rather addressing the solutions as they might deliver the best for the money and the best at the place they are installed. So for us, de-risking the assets is very key when charging infra becomes a commodity, for sure. No unique technical choice, and in the end, we will not choose. It's the market who will, and we will follow. So that was it for me. Thanks for your attention. I see there were different questions that I did not look at the moment they came, but I guess we will have the opportunity to answer to them later.
Thank you, Laurent. Yeah, so we'll get to the Q&A in just a bit. I think we're going to have to go to Nikki next, just because we're a little short on time, but we can certainly come back to Michael and have him wrap up if need be during that Q&A. And I see he's been very busy in the chat, so that's really great. Nikki, take it from here.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you to Symbiat and Whit for arranging this. It is great to see you all here today. So my job in this particular panel is to talk less about the industrial implications of wireless charging, but rather to talk about the misconceptions and the myths that exist in the wider sector, both in passenger vehicles and just outside of the EV industry completely. And so let's start by talking about my own personal experience in the EV world. I've been driving electric vehicles now for 14 years. I am currently on my 12th plug-in, if you count vehicles that both my partner and I have owned over the years. It started with a little yellow electric bubble car called the City L, which we called the Flying Banana. And then it's progressed over the years. I've owned my wedding car, which was the 1985 Golf City Stroma, which now sits in a museum at Volkswagen's headquarters in the UK. And I've owned two vehicles that have had inductive charging. One, of course, is the RAV4 EV, the first generation RAV4 EV, which had wireless inductive paddle charging. And probably the more interesting for the use in this panel is, of course, a wireless pad underneath the vehicle that was fitted to our Nissan Leaf as a review car. So for Transport Evolved, we reached out to Plugless Power. Shortly after we moved to the United States, it would have been, we moved to the US in 2015. I think it was installed in 2016. And we got to test out a wireless inductive charging system in the real world. Now, I want to reiterate that this is a first generation charger. It was capable of charging at up to 3 kilowatts peak power. It wasn't particularly powerful. It was actually slower using that wireless charging system than the conductive standard J1772 plug that you just plug into the front of the vehicle. That was not a fault of wireless charging per se, but that was a fault of the system, which was only specified to charge up to 3 kilowatts. It was an aftermarket installation. The company that produces it, I believe, is no longer in business. It was a sort of a kit that arrived. We worked with a local garage here in Portland, Oregon, to have it installed, and it required removing the underside of the vehicle's sort of under panel, installing the wireless charger, and then, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, installing a wireless pad in the floor of our garage. Now, we did have a video. Unfortunately, we can't show that with you right now, but the video demonstrated how this system works. There were lights that guided you in as you drove into your garage. The lights started to pulse slower as you reached the inductive pad. When you were in the right place, the pulsing arrows turned into a green ring around the Plugless Power logo, and you could get out of the car, turn the car off, and it would automatically start charging. Now, you can go and watch that review on the Transport Evolved website. But we came up with some problems that we personally felt from testing out that early sort of first or second generation wireless charging system. First of all, we found it was difficult to position the car in a single car garage. It was a rented property at the time. It was convenient for sure, but it wasn't a domestic situation solution because you can plug a car in a few seconds. We also noted that the garage heated up more when we used the inductive charging system than when we used a connected plug. Again, that was due to the early generation technology, not down to the fact that this is wireless charging. It was slower than the physical plug, which of course we've already covered. And also the cost outweighed the benefits, at least from a consumer point of view. The other issue that we had with that plugless power system, which is something that I believe that McHale and everybody else in the industry no longer has to deal with, is that on those early prototype, early consumer kind of bleeding edge systems, you had to pair the car and the base station, which meant that it only really worked in one location where you happened to have that base station. So I reached out to my Twitter followers the other day and I asked them what they thought of wireless charging, because we're talking about myths and misconceptions. First of all, a lot of people thought it was a waste of money, 18%. 14% said it was cool and they wanted it. 21%, interestingly, said it will help EV adoption. And 47% said it was inefficient. Now, if you look at the results of the poll that you yourselves filled out at the beginning of this session, you'll notice that 47% said cost was a concern, 5% said safety was a concern, 9% said they had health concerns, and 34% said that there were efficiency problems. Now, interestingly, I don't know what's happened with that slide. I don't know why that's happened. That didn't happen in my own version, but let's go along with it. Okay, so we have a problem here. Expectations versus reality. A lot of people think that wireless charging is going to be great in the home, but it doesn't make sense in the home because of the convenience is so limited on a day-to-day sort of basis. People think it's going to help EV adoption, but there are much bigger hurdles to overcome first, which we'll talk about in a second. Dynamic wireless charging gets a lot of coverage from the media, but and people think that that will give us unlimited range, but the reality is we have that bathroom problem. Everyone needs to stop to visit the restroom at some point. And so dynamic wireless charging on the road, as you can see maybe in the image behind, is not really a very useful way to look at wireless charging in the future. So this slide's better. All right, it's low powered, but it's not. DC levels of rapid charging are now available with wireless systems. A lot of people say it's inefficient. You yourself did, my Twitter followers did, but the actual system efficiency of most good wireless charging systems today is on par with a DC quick charging system, about 97%, which is crazy. It's impressive for sure. And that's partly because they're using magnetic resonance charging systems. I'll look at that in a second, because the other thing that people say is it's unsafe, especially if you have a pacemaker and other things. But again, that's not true. Modern magnetic resonant charging systems, which is what everybody's using, uses a specific tuned frequency between the transmitter and the receiver on the vehicle. And that means it's very, very safe. Also, I don't want to go into the physics of here, but you've got the inverse square law in terms of distance from the pad to whatever it is you're worried about. And I have an implanted device. So I have a heart monitor. This is literally my remote control. I press this button and I hold it against my chest, and it sends a recording from my heart to my cardiologist. I can use these systems, as can anybody else with an implanted device, because these systems are inherently very safe. They also have object detection, which we don't have to worry about. The other misconception is that it's just for people who are lazy and can't be bothered to plug in. But as we've seen earlier on in this presentation, it's really geared more towards fleet operators. So let's now look at these last pages of expectations. Car companies are doing it already, but they're not really. People are not yet ready to pay a premium, as we showed earlier on in that other survey at the beginning. People say it's not going to catch on. It maybe not is going to catch on yet with personal fleets, but with autonomous vehicle fleets and large corporate fleets, I think it will catch on. And the final misconception is it's going to make battery packs smaller, but the reality is that the larger a battery pack is, the longer it will tend to last, because there's less strain on the battery pack. So I don't think that's a valid argument going forwards. I don't know what is going on with these slides. I do apologize. So we have a more appropriate roadmap that we need to look at moving forwards. And I'm actually going to just talk about this, as my slides have decided to not work. So we have some challenges that we need to focus on moving forwards. And the top of that list, before we get caught in the misconceptions and myths about wireless charging, is to look at the reality. First, it's going to be deployed in commercial situations, large warehouses, and also corporate fleets. Buses, taxi services, they're going to be the first to get it. They can be the bleeding edge. The return on investment for them and the capital expenditure is a lot easier to write off than it is for individuals. At that point, then we're going to start to see this trickle down. If bus drivers and delivery drivers are using it and taxi drivers are using it, then you might see it in cities, in on-street parking situations where people can't charge at home. And that is an issue that I think we're going to see wireless charging solve. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to first see these cars come in as high-end premium models. They're going to be the first to experiment with it, ones that have autonomous driving capabilities, for example. And then we're going to see a trickle down. I predict it's going to be a decade or more before any kind of wireless charging is anywhere near ubiquitous. You only have to look at how we are doing today with DC rapid charging, and in fact, regular EV charging, full stop. We have a lot of work to do. We have to focus on just getting charging stations out in the wild before we start to deploy wireless charging because it's cool, and instead focus on using the correct infrastructure for the correct application. In some areas, that's going to be conductive charging, physically plugging it in. In others, it's going to be wireless charging, larger fleets, large warehouses, and that is really where you see this switch off. We're not going to see it as a retrofit option because, as my own experience has shown, retrofits are not really very capable because you have to design a system that works for everything. There's all of the homologation and all of the internal testing, which, unless you are a tier 1 part supplier, unless you are an OEM, is going to cost a lot of money to do. So what's our homework? We need to design inductive wireless charging for practicality in fleets before the wow factor of OEMs. We need to focus on commercial deployments first, rather than personal fleets. And then in the future, we also then need to have a more honest discussion with each other about fueling EVs. Because if we get caught up in the wow factor of all of this, we lose sight of what's really important, which is transitioning the world's fleet away from fossil fuels and towards electric vehicles, decarbonizing our transportation solutions, and giving ourselves a future where we are able to talk about electric fuel. You'll notice that very few OEMs, very few car companies, very few dealers understand electric fuel and what its importance is in the world, understand its ubiquity. And I would argue that that is our first challenge, which is one of the reasons why I'm so keen to support projects like the Chargeway system, because it enables and empowers people to make that transition, understanding how important that is. So thank you very much. I will hand back to Whit for the questions.
Excellent. Let's have everybody, all the panelists, turn on their cameras if possible. I know we've had some technical issues previously or earlier. Looks like we've got everybody here. So the first question I wanted to ask, and I'm thinking this might be a question from Michael, is the maintenance of wireless charging. This comes from our own Forth's Aaron Gallagher. Michael, could you respond to that?
Yeah, maintenance is significantly lower than all of the systems because there are no moving parts. When we look at the maintenance costs involved in typical EV charging, it's repair of cables, it's wear and tear on socketry, it's the dispenser itself, which is above the ground. Our stuff is buried. You don't touch it, you don't see it. We've had stuff in the ground now for 5 years, and we've never lifted the lid. It doesn't require maintenance at all. Although our maintenance sales team would like to tell you otherwise, as they sell you the ongoing care package. But it's a very low maintenance system.
Any other comments, Nikki or Laurent?
I think that Laurent, please, Karen.
No, I just had a small comment on cars. Definitely, there are no moving parts. On some buses, I guess, but Michael, you will correct me if it's not correct anymore. But there are some buses who have moving parts in the vehicle itself, just to go down and be closer to the ground pad. Is this always like this? Is this?
Oh yeah. So buses kneel at every pickup point anyway. So even if they're not charging, they're still kneeling. That's part of their. That's why we use that, because it's a feature that already exists.
I was going to add that the benefits of not having the infrastructure above the street is something that Laurent touched on in his presentation for historical areas, but it's also an anti-theft device. You don't have anybody stealing cables. It's very hard to vandalize something that is buried under the ground. And so that can also be beneficial. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is the concerns of poor weather and inclement weather. Michael, maybe this is something you can talk to. close to us here in Portland, obviously we have Mount Hood. If you were to drive up to the Mount Hood ski area in the winter, the charging stations that are available up there are often inaccessible because they're under a large amount of snow. And that's something that you don't have to worry about with that system, right?
That's exactly right. The magnetic field generated has no knowledge of snow and ice. They do not exist in the same physical world. So there can be a layer of ice, a layer of snow, a layer of water, and it still charges. And one of the reasons we like to bury the pad underground is for snowplows. So we can have the snowplow come through and not damage the equipment. We can put it above ground, but it lasts longer. It's more robust if we put it below the ground. That's exactly right.
So the next question I wanted to ask was about standards and interoperability and compatibility between different modes as well as different OEMs, and where are we in that kind of this stage of the process, and where are we going to in the future?
Is that a question for me?
I think it's a question for all three of you, in terms of what standards are we looking at right now, and what level of interoperability do we have right now, and will we get to a place where we're further along?
Well, I think, to Nikki's point earlier, we are sometimes a victim of our predecessors who didn't really understand the market. They had a technology they were trying to sell, and just because something can do something doesn't mean anybody else wants it. And there was a little bit of that with the 3 kilowatt systems. It was technically possible, but not really useful. And so we're in a space now where we're providing something that's really useful because we're 50 kilowatts and above, and it's something that can change someone's day. But people still, the first conversation you have with people, they remember those early ones and say, oh, they're underpowered, they're tiny little things, they're no good to anybody. And, life moves on. When I first had my wireless charge phone, I never used it, but here it is now. And I just drop this thing on every day. And it's beautiful. I drop this thing on for 5 minutes at a time. And I go to bed at night, my phone's still charged magically. Because I never have to unplug it. And that's the way that our life will be. But there is definitely still this perception of 3 kilowatts. And we're at 300 kilowatts.
I think it's not just a wireless charging thing, though, Whit. I think the EV industry as a whole has not always been great when it comes to standards. This is something, obviously, that we've seen because of the SAE and other organizations that are glacial in their movement. I mean, you only have to look at how long it's taken the SAE to ratify a V2G interoperability standard for EVs. And most automakers are not even bothering because of that. But the other thing to bear in mind is that when it comes to commercial vehicles, historically, we have used consumer vehicle standards for commercial vehicle applications. The idea of a bus that is capable of rapid charging, having 2 CHAdeMO connectors on so you can charge with 2 independent charging stations or 2 CCS connections. This is why the CharIN standard exists. Its organization, it is working to develop a more appropriate rapid charge system for commercial vehicles. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it feels like what we're seeing in terms of wireless inductive charging today is that industrial scale application, which is better suited to those vehicles rather than what we're seeing at a consumer level. And I think we need to be happy with there being two different standards and having a differentiation between something that you would use with your car and something that you would use with a commercial vehicle that has a 400 kilowatt hour battery pack that needs to put 0.5 megawatt of power in while it's standing at a bus stop for 10 minutes.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot. There is a standard that has been developed recently that goes up to 11 kilowatts. And they deliberately stop there for reasons that don't matter here, but they deliberately stop there. And, it's a use case. And so we're developing standards and understanding the point about speed of standard development. We're developing or promoting the development of standards that take care of charging above there. If you think about it, it's like trying to make a parking lot where every parking space suits every vehicle on the market. And so that's trying to allow, for a garbage truck to park at your local Wawa, but you don't have Wawa, but your local gas station. And you have to make a parking space that's ridiculously cumbersome to suit everybody. So
Gotcha.
maybe the solution is to find standards that suit certain sectors. So maybe there's a low power standard, and that's fine. And then there's a high power standard, and then that's something that we adhere to. And I think that's the solution. So, if you're driving a Class 8 vehicle, you wouldn't expect to park it, in a parking space outside of Macy's, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And so that's kind of how we think about it.
So I've got another question here, and I think this one should start with Laurent. What are some examples of scaled fleets, or are we still just at the trial small-sized fleets right now?
Question for me?
No, for Laurent to start.
Well, I think that Michael will have a better answer than I have, but I think it's depending on what you consider as the vehicles, because on cars, you have the example that Michael gave about Oslo. I think it's about 25 vehicles that will in the end be there. I'm not aware of larger fleets today using inductive at car level. Buses, obviously, neither, not at that high amount. The projects that have been implemented in the past were about 3-5 buses, not necessarily more today. But it's a beginning, of course.
What was the bus company that failed in Belgium? What was the system there? Do you know?
It was a prime move system. So that was, and I don't have all the details why it failed basically, but what was said was related to the charging infrastructure.
It's a rush to market. Okay.
All right. For a wrap-up question, starting with you, Nikki, what are you most excited to see in the next few years coming out of wireless charging in this sector, or this slice of the sector?
Honestly, I want to see more accessibility. I can see the benefits for corporations, having fewer people having to worry about charging vehicles being able to autonomously park and charge when they need to, just like my vacuum cleaner. But I'm also really hoping that we see the beginnings of a consumer standard and the beginnings of parking and inductive charging for people who don't have a driveway, people who don't have a garage, people who don't have parking at home. Because it is my personal belief that those are the people who can generally benefit most from electric vehicles. And that is really what I'm most excited to see, the development of a system that can work with vehicles. Now, I don't think it's going to be in the next few years, Whit. I think it's going to be in the next decade or more. But ultimately, I think that's what I want to see most.
Thank you. Laurent or Michael?
I really couldn't add more to that. I think that the entire EV industry is, at such an inflection point right now, and we're looking at how to get consumers into vehicles, and we're looking at how to get transit agencies into vehicles, and we're looking at how to electrify our railways. We're producing EV powered or electric powered trains, and not in the sense of the light rail that we're used to, but massive intercontinental trains being battery powered. And how do we charge them? In the end, everything goes cableless. I used to have a remote control for my TV that had a cable on it. My printer I used to have to plug into, and in the end the cables go away. And it does become, to your original point, it does become a convenience feature in the end. But before that, it has to earn its money as an efficiency feature. And so we're going to see that with EVs themselves, that they're just nicer to drive. They're just better. But people have to understand that first, and it has to go through that being worth it to somebody. And that's the same with charging. It's the same with everything in my life. But in the end, if the cost of adoption is low enough, the easiest option wins. And wireless is the easiest option. We have to get the cost of adoption low enough for the consumer. It's already there for fleets, but that's the process for me.
Dr. Laurent, let's have your take.
Well, I think that we are in a situation today where mobility, energy, and infrastructure are going all together in a really imbricated way, which has never been the same before. We are really crossing sectors that didn't know each other 10 or 15 years ago. This brings a lot of challenges because there is a need to understand each other. There is a need to understand the objectives and the constraints of the different segments. And at the same time, there is a lot of opportunities there. When looking at the EV in general, it is often said as being an issue for energy reasons because there will be a need for much more energy. Actually, that's not the case. One. And it's also a way to facilitate the use of all the renewable, to implement storage, and to have all the energy management made better, which is good for everyone. Now, the infrastructure that is related to that can facilitate all this is definitely something that is at the heart of the ecosystem, because obviously you need the infra to have it. I believe that, as I said in the presentation, the link between inductive and autonomous vehicles, which is coming sooner or later, but it is coming, will also be closely connected to the energy segment that I'm representing here. And I'm very excited about how all these things can evolve together, because definitely there is room there.
Thank you all so much, and I'll let Simbi take it out.
Well, thank you all to our speakers today. We have one final poll questions for our attendees on how you found our webinar today. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I also want to thank our panelists, our moderator Whit for your fantastic job moderating this webinar. I want to thank Michael, Laurent, and Nikki for taking your time to speak with us today and share your knowledge in this topic. I also want to thank Momentum Dynamics for supporting this webinar today. As I mentioned, we will share the webinar recap with you all at the end, which is now, shortly after when we pull some of the information together. We will share the recording and the webinar slides as well. We know we did not get through all of the questions during the webinar. We will provide some opportunities for those questions to be answered by our panelists today as well. And we hope you're able to join us for our next webinar in our series, which is coming up on Tuesday, March 9th at 10 a.m. We'll be taking flight with electric aviation. We'll be joined by our panelists to discuss and highlight potentials and advantages of electric aviation, potential upcoming projects, and more. Again, we thank you all for joining us and taking the time with us today. Have a wonderful day.